Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, the podcast where narrative meets mechanics and collaboration brings it all to life. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today I'm joined by Kristi Eckert, a narrative designer whose career spans game studios, storytelling systems, and the fine art of cross-disciplinary collaboration. Kristi brings a sharp understanding of how communication, not just creative vision, is a secret weapon for solving narrative challenges in real-world development. In this episode, we'll talk about how Kristi's journey shaped her collaborative style, why shared language between departments matters, and how writers and narrative designers can step up as communicators, not just storytellers. So, let's get into it. Kristi, thank you for joining me.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. You're very welcome.
I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. It took us a while to put this together, but here we are sitting down and chatting. And today we're going to talk about communication and collaboration specifically for solving narrative problems. That's kind of the lens we want to use today. Before we dive into that topic, though, I do like to set the stage with an origin story. How did you fall in love with gaming and writing? How did you find your way into the career, into the industry? What are you up to these days? All of that fun stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. I guess I'll just start when I fell in love with gaming. So, my earliest memories with games include the Sega Pico, if you're familiar. That was like my very first console. I was like 5 years old. And then also I had the little Tiger Electronics games. I had like Beauty and the Beast and 101 Dalmatians. I was also really, really fond of simulation games that were really popular in the early 90s and 2000s. So, things like Roller Coaster Tycoon, The Sims, Zoo Tycoon. I was really, really obsessed with a game called Pets before it was published by Ubisoft. So this is when it was being published. I'm not sure if it was developed by, but I know it was published by PF Magic. And I still have an old Dell computer with my pets on it from like 2004 because I just do not have the heart to get rid of it. I was also a Nintendo kid, so I was gifted a N64 for Christmas in 96. And my sister rented a ton of N64 games from Blockbuster. We were specifically obsessed with Tarzan because we could never get past the tree surfing level. I was also really obsessed with Pokemon Stadium on the N64. And then I eventually became like a PlayStation teenager. Kingdom Hearts was really formative for me. However, I think I truly like fell in love with games the first time, and this might be a little bit cliche, that I beat Pokemon Blue as like a 10-year-old kid. So like journeying through that game and persevering to like finally defeat the Elite Four was something at that age, like it was very transformative for me. And I think it instilled in me sort of like a tenacity and a follow through. And Pokemon just really continues to hold a very special place in my heart to this day. So I still play all of the core games and everything, and also all of the spin-offs. So yeah, that's just, I guess that is the game that made me truly love games.
Nice.
And so yeah, I guess how does that translate? How does that passion translate into me becoming a narrative designer? That's a much more long-winded answer.
We got some time. Let's hear it.
Okay, so I had a really eclectic path that has led me up to this point in my career where I am now, very windy journey. And I guess I'll start by saying that writing has always been a cornerstone in my life. So prior to graduating high school, I actually even considered being a screenwriter at one point. I adored writing poetry. I used to write fan fiction on fanfiction.com or .net rather, Alias and Grey's Anatomy. Alias is my longest one, and I also did some for Grey's Anatomy. But yeah, I loved fan fiction, and I just always really loved to create through words. Despite that, though, I didn't major in writing initially. So after graduating high school, I went to NYU, and I actually double majored in early childhood education and childhood psychology. And then I sort of had this, and I was actually student teaching down in Tribeca in New York City. And I was doing that for a while. And I had this moment where I just was sitting down with myself, and I realized that even though I have like such a deep reverence for teachers, like my aunt is a teacher, I grew up like helping her in her classroom, and like a deep reverence for learning. And I'm even a substitute teacher now for my day job. So I love teaching, right? But I realized that it wouldn't, as a career, satiate my soul in the way that I needed it to be satiated. And so when I realized this, I kind of like reflected and I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do, Kristi? And so despite having never acted a day in my life, I decided that I wanted to be an actress. And I know that I was at NYU. However, because I had zero experience, I was naive, but not as naive to think that I could get into Tisch. So what I did was I left NYU. It was a really hard decision. And I studied with an acting coach, and then I actually auditioned at the New York Conservatory for Dramatic Arts. And I studied there for 2 years, and I got a certificate in dramatic performance. And so yeah, and then I lived and I worked in the city for a long time. Well, about 5 years after that, I worked, and I had like a lot of different odd jobs. So I worked at the NBC Experience Store, which doesn't exist anymore. It was in Rockefeller Center. That's actually where I met the love of my life, Wilson, and we've been together for 15 years now. So I worked at the Apple Store on Fifth Avenue. I worked at a restaurant as a host in the Plaza Hotel. So yeah, a lot of like fun little odd jobs in the city. But it was just really hard to make ends meet in the city, especially as a young 20 something. And, acting is really hard, and that really wasn't panning out for me. So I made the decision to come home to New Jersey, and where I'm from, and he actually followed me home. And so, and after that, I was sort of like aimless for a while. I had a stint doing like wine sales, and then eventually I landed in the animal welfare space, and I spent a decade as a professional dog groomer and a dog walker. But that I did not stop there, because even though like that was another really, really formative part of my life, and I'm a huge animal lover, I still wasn't fulfilled, I think, the way that I needed to be. And also the fact that I had never finished my bachelor's degree, because the conservatory was only a certificate program, it really weighed heavily on me. So at 30 years old, I decided to go back for my bachelor's degree. And I didn't go back to NYU. I went to Montclair State University here in New Jersey, and I studied public and professional writing. And when I got back to school, I realized that, what had been missing, like the piece that had been missing, like for me career wise, and I guess cognitively, and perhaps spiritually and emotionally, was the fact that I never gave what was such a cornerstone in my life a chance. And so this was my chance to do that. And so I graduated in 2021, and I quickly forged a pretty successful career as a copywriter. I was the managing editor of a lifestyle publication for a while, and I learned a lot there. But the creativity is what was missing. And I'm a very stubborn person as well. And I just need to be fulfilled, like cognitively, emotionally, creatively, spiritually. And so I sat down with my partner again, and I had a bunch of talks with him. And we realized that what I actually wanted to do was merge two passions of mine. And I think at this point in my life, all of my previous experiences that have formed me and shaped me allowed me to understand myself so much better. And so I was able to look back, where I had come from, what was missing all along, and then where I wanted to be. And I realized that I wanted to merge these two passions that have been a part of my life, my entire life. So that's writing and gaming. Right. And that's how I decided to pursue narrative design. That was the spark that was finally lit. And that was January of 2023. And I really hit the ground running from there. So credit to Wilson. He found this amazing school and community called the Indie Game Academy, which is where I got started. So I began enrolling in their classes. I took a bunch of their classes, and then following that, I just stuck around the community. I found that community to be like really wholesome, and just I felt like safe there, and like the fact that it was just a place for me to learn and grow and meet like-minded folks. And so after those classes, though, I started to upskill independently. I started joining a lot of game jams, just getting my game development hands like dirty, so to speak. And then perhaps to bring it full circle, I guess, because of the tenacity that was birthed by my very first playthrough of Pokemon Blue, I have now been blessed to work on over 10 indie titles overall, and that's like game jams and like student projects. And now, I own my own studio, and I guess that brings me to the owning my own studio part. So yeah, after, gaining all of that experience, I just had this desire, even though the gaming industry is a really tough place to be in right now. I just had this desire to remain in the space and keep cultivating the one career that has been able to truly fulfill me on every level. And I'm just not willing to give that up. And so I decided to co-found Future Suit Games with my two other amazing co-founders. And yeah, we're currently about a year into development on Daughter of the Rift, which is our story-rich sci-fi deck builder. And I have had the very blessed opportunity to actually, our studio rather has had the very blessed opportunity to partner with the Indie Game Academy. So we're a part of their Foundry program, which is a new kind of like pilot program that they're running. It's essentially like a career incubator combined with like a publishing arm. And yeah, called the Indie Game Foundry. And so we've been working alongside them. They've been guiding us and helping us like through this new murky studio process and all of the facets that go along with that as we develop Daughter of the Rift. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am now.
That's a fantastic journey. I love those stories. People wander down side trails and do side quests along the way, and eventually you get there. That's so cool.
Yeah. I'm too stubborn to give up on myself.
That's probably one of the most important traits to have. It seems to be in the game industry, is you've got to be tenacious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. I agree.
Well, let's tap into the experience you've had along the way and your own studio, and let's talk about the core topic today. So, just to set the stage and to start narrowing us in on this, in your experience, where do narrative breakdowns actually happen in game development, and why is communication and collaboration so often key to fixing these things?
Yeah, so I think in my experience, the answer to that question is actually in the question itself. I think narrative breakdowns happen because of a breakdown in communication and or collaboration on a team. And I'll also add that it likely also stems from somewhere down the line, a breakdown in trust. Because a team working together, I think, needs to trust everyone else to bring their piece of the pie to the table and also trust each other enough to be able to talk about things freely, like when problems inevitably like crop up. And game development is not easy to begin with, but developing, a narrative that supports and even fuels gameplay and the overall experience, in my opinion, is it's just a massive feat in general. So I think in order to solve this communication problem that likely will happen, right? In order to get a narrative with like really good legs, I should say, off the ground, there has to be open and consistent communication from the very beginning. And there has to be an established level of trust, because if everyone goes off, if there's no communication or very loose communication in the beginning and everybody thinks they have an idea of what they're going to work on, and they go off and they work in their own silos on their own pieces, and then it comes back together and you're trying to fit these different pieces together that are not meant to go together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I think that causes friction, and when that friction occurs is when you have these breakdowns in communication. And I think, and interestingly enough, because when these breakdowns happen, in my experience, the first thing to get cut is often the narrative, because I think ultimately for a game to function, you technically don't need a narrative for a game to function. What you need is a functioning gameplay loop and engaging mechanics. If you have that, you technically have a game. And so, but I think to solve this is just opening a line of communication early, checking in often, and then I think by doing that, there becomes a greater chance of the pieces getting developed in tandem, that are meant to work together instead of being forced to work together. And then so I'll give an example of when sort of actually a communication, like establishing it early and often, that actually worked. So I actually worked on this game called Strange New Tides, and I served as the narrative lead. And so I had already worked on projects prior to where there were breakdowns in communication, and I was on the narrative team, and a lot of the times the narrative did get cut. And so one of my priorities when I stepped into the lead position for this game was that I wanted to make sure that the narrative, one, fit with the game, and that it was preserved. and so players could experience it the way that the narrative team envisioned, but really the way that the entire team overall envisioned. And so in order to ensure this, I met early on with the game's creative director, and I pitched to him two different high-level narratives that I thought could work for the game based upon what was already outlined in the game's GDD. And then what we settled on one, and then I went back to my team and I communicated to my team, this is how I think with the existing systems that are going to be in place, how our narrative could work. And essentially the loop was that, well, the loop, I guess I should kind of tell you what the game was. So Strangely Tides was like an Animal Crossing clone, and it was about like a little kid Cthulhu named Munch who was whisked away from his home in the depths of the ocean, and he washes up in like a strange new land called Salt Bay Cove, and he meets all these like different people that are or animals rather that are residing there. So yeah, I went back to my team to outline how the narrative play out. And in this case, it was through Munch interacting with and eventually befriending the town's residents. And I made it so that each member of my team could own a piece of the narrative. So they each owned a resident on the island. So I had them, feel empowered in that way. And then I also frequently advocated for narrative by meeting with the other departments and collaborating with the other departments to make sure the visions were continued to be aligned. So I collaborated with the art lead a lot to make sure that the character profiles that my team was generating sort of matched what the artists were coming up with. And then, tweaking and providing feedback as necessary and vice versa. And then also I collaborated closely with the sound department to make sure that the sound effects that were being created for the characters aligned with the vision that my team members had for their character. So I was a frequent advocate for the narrative that we were developing, and I frequently checked in with the other departments to make sure that the narrative wasn't lost. And that it continued to be aligned with how the game was being developed. So that was like an example, I think, of a case where communication, really establishing it early and checking in often, really helped the game be better for it.
I'm curious, when you talk about working between departments and different teams and the collaboration and communication that takes place there, they often have not only different goals, like narrative has different goals than gameplay, but they also have different jargon, languages, lexicons. Is it important to build and establish a bridge language, a shared language you can all use?
Yeah, I think so. This is something that I think I'm still working on, and I don't think that there's perhaps one right answer. I'm inclined to say yes, but I think what's more important is, keeping that consistent line of communication open, making sure that the team has this level of trust, but also following up when necessary. So like asking clarifying questions, because there's always going to be like misinterpretation or like miscommunication. And so asking clarifying questions like, when you said this, did you mean this? I'm just, or, just those kind of follow-ups, I think help to establish kind of an understanding, like a shared understanding of what everybody is going to bring to the table, and kind of like what your piece and what you should be working on. And then I think also understanding the focus, capacity, and like limitations of each department. So for example, like in the game that I'm working on, I would love to have like big, epic, sweeping cutscenes, right, for these heavier narrative beats that I'm writing. But because we are a small indie team with only 3 co-founders and 3 team members, our ability to do that is, that it would just take so much time and so much effort. And I think the game would really suffer for it because, if we put so much focus and energy there, then inevitably we're only, 6 people. Our energy would be depleted, and maybe perhaps other areas of the game would suffer. And so understanding your team's limitations and what they can actually develop and what's also realistic for the scope of the game, I think is also really important in cultivating like a shared, not necessarily jargon, but just really shared understanding of what the game you're making is going to be.
Right. For people working in narrative in that situation, have you found in your experience in other studios or with your own studio tools, techniques, practices that allow the narrative to stay connected in communication throughout the whole process from ideation to prototype, like the whole thing? How do you stay in there?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's just kind of constantly talking between departments. I think a lot with with narrative, I feel like a lot of it is advocating for what you're creating, and I'll advocate, as I'm like developing a narrative, I'll advocate that this is going to make, the game better, especially if it's developed with a shared vision. Also another thing is speaking with your engineering department to see if they can make you tools to empower you to control how the narrative is implemented as a narrative designer. So especially in the indie space, so like in the AAA in the AAA space, usually tasks like that are much more like segmented. Like the game writers are siloed from the people who are actually implementing the text. However, in the indie space, which is really great, is that a lot of the times game writers are doing the more technical work and taking their text and putting it in engine. So if your engineer that you're working with, or engineers or engineering department, can develop tools to empower you to put the narrative in the game, I feel like that goes a long way in keeping the narrative connected to the connected throughout development.
Gotcha. For somebody who's maybe new or looking to get into it, what advice would you give them around advocating, around getting in that space and making sure they don't get siloed out or are left outside of those conversations?
Yeah, I think speak up, ask questions, learn from teams whose communication and collaboration styles don't work for you, and also learn from the ones that do. So a
Hmm.
big part of that is trying to gain experience. So game jams, you're going to work with a bunch of different people that you perhaps never have worked with before, and you're going to be met with a lot of different like working styles. And so understanding yourself and how you work best, and also who you work best with, or the kinds of working styles that you work best with, I think is really important. And don't be afraid to advocate for your role. And because I think when every department succeeds, the game is always better for it. So if you can advocate for your role, and not just advocate for it, but say why this is going to make the game better, and how it's going to, and how you feel that it's going to align with the different systems in the game, I think communicating that goes a long way. So I think that's probably the best advice. That Oh, and you know what? Find your people. Like find a community that you feel safe in, and that you feel like you can share things with and talk to, and learn from. Because I think community, especially in the gaming space, and especially during tough times like this one, it really goes a long way. So
Yeah. That's good advice for life in general, though. So,
yeah,
like it.
that's true. That's true.
All right, well, let's bring the core topic to a close. I got some fun stuff afterwards, but to bring this to a close, let's flip it on its head. And what's advice for studio runners or people who are in charge of teams to ensure that narrative is involved, that narrative isn't being siloed out or reaching too much friction, at least? How do you help bring narrative in as somebody running the show?
So I think I'll bring it back to like empowering narrative designers to implement their own text. So if you can establish that, so if you make it a part of the process from the very beginning, and you empower the narrative team to own it, to own their
Yeah.
narrative and also implement it, I think that is probably the best advice that I could give for another studio founder or studio owner trying to make sure that they include narrative. And then yeah, just constantly communicate, like between with narrative, with the other departments, have shared meetings, so that that shared understanding of the game and its systems can happen. So I think, yeah, empower narrative, and make it a part of the process.
Love it. Good stuff. Okay, well, that brings us to the close of the core stuff, and that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Before we
you're
start
welcome.
heading for the door, I have a fun philosophical question I ask everybody, have for years now. So if you've listened before, you've probably heard it, and now it's your turn. So bear with me. It's kind of fun. In my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of story and game where people can just connect, get along. There's a shared fellowship. If you agree with me, if you believe in this little theory, not everybody does, but if you do, what would you say is the magical thread that holds all that together?
Yeah. So I think I do agree with you. And I think it is the shared human experience. I think it is the human condition itself, right? I think experience is translated into stories, no matter the medium. They connect us all. And stories are special because human stories are special or interesting, exciting, insert any adjective there, right? They all intersect because they speak to the very core of the human condition. So I
Love
think
it. a great answer. Great answer. All right, we're going to start heading for the door here. I do like to open a little space for signal boosting. Anything you're working on or have worked on you want to talk about, or where can people find you online? And obviously, Daughters of the Rift, hit me with it.
Yeah, so yeah, I would love it if everyone checked out Daughter of the Rift Steam page. We're really looking for wish lists right now, and there's a free demo up. So yeah, I would absolutely love that and be so grateful if you all checked that out. In terms of, I also did work on another title called Esports Team Manager, and that is actually available for Steam for purchase on Steam for purchase. So you can check that out as well. Personally, I'm on LinkedIn. That's pretty much all the social media I use. I'm not a big fan of social media, but professionally, Future Suit Games, which is my company, is pretty much everywhere. We have a Discord community. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Instagram, although we don't post there too often. But yeah, mainly LinkedIn. Definitely join Future Suits Discord. We would love to have you there. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, I will throw all the links down in the comments, the description stuff, down in the doobly-doos. So that's it. I'm going to push you out the door. I do like to give the last word of the show to the guests. So do you have any parting words of wisdom? It could be craft, could be life, could be a recipe.
Yeah, so I think go out there to everybody. Go out there and live. Run through the woods, meet up with friends, take risks, go on vacations, explore the world. And then put your pen, for those aspiring writers out there, put your pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, and let the words flow. And never be afraid to change directions or explore new avenues, right? This is your journey and no one can take that from you. So dare to live, dare to dream, dare to try. And when that happens, I think that you'll discover your own stories.
And that wraps up another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Kristi, thank you for showing us how strong communication doesn't just fix problems. It builds better stories, stronger teams, and more playable worlds. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until next time, keep playing games, telling stories, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.